The human mind remains one of the greatest mysteries we've ever encountered. Think about it. Right now, someone specific might be occupying your thoughts. Their face, their voice, memories of them seem to appear without invitation. But why this person? Why now? The renowned Swiss psychologist Carl Jung had profound insights into this phenomenon that continue to shape our understanding of the human psyche today. His theories offer powerful explanations for why certain people become fixtures in our mental landscape. We all experience it, that person who seems to live rent-free in our minds. Sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes painful, but always significant. What Jung discovered about this experience reveals deeper truths about ourselves than we might expect. In Jung's view, when someone persistently occupies your thoughts, it's rarely a random occurrence. It's a signal from your unconscious mind, attempting to communicate something vital about yourself. Let's explore what your mind might be trying to tell you. Jung believed that the people who dominate our thoughts often represent parts of ourselves, aspects we may not fully recognize or accept. He called this psychological mechanism projection. According to Jung, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Consider the story of Maya, a young professional who couldn't stop thinking about her coworker, James. She found herself constantly analyzing their interactions, wondering what he thought of her. Maya initially believed she was developing romantic feelings, but through self-reflection, she realized something deeper was at work. What Maya admired in James was his confidence in meetings and his ability to set boundaries, qualities she struggled to embody herself. Her mind wasn't fixated on James the person, but on what he represented, aspects of herself she needed to develop. Jung would describe this as Maya's unconscious recognizing qualities in James that existed as untapped potential within herself. The persistent thoughts weren't really about James at all. They were her psyche's way of highlighting important growth areas. This connects to one of Jung's most significant contributions to psychology, the concept of the shadow. Jung wrote, "The shadow is that hidden, repressed, for the most part inferior and guilt-laden personality whose ultimate ramifications reach back into the realm of our animal ancestors." In simpler terms, the shadow contains the parts of ourselves we've denied, repressed, or never developed. When someone is constantly on your mind, they may be activating your shadow content, reflecting back to you the qualities you've disowned in yourself. Think about someone who irritates you intensely, someone who keeps appearing in your thoughts despite your best efforts to forget them. Jung would suggest that this person has likely triggered shadow aspects within you. The qualities that bother you most in others often point to disowned parts of yourself. For example, David found himself constantly thinking about his neighbor, who he perceived as lazy and irresponsible. These thoughts consumed him to an unusual degree. Through Jungian analysis, David came to recognize that he had developed a rigid inner critic that never allowed him to rest or relax. His neighbor represented a freedom and ease that David had completely denied himself. The persistent thoughts were his unconscious mind's attempt to restore balance to his overly disciplined life. Jung observed, "We cannot change anything until we accept it." David's preoccupation with his neighbor was an invitation to accept his own need for rest and relaxation. This brings us to another crucial Jungian concept that explains why someone might dominate your thoughts: the anima and animus. Jung believed that men carry an inner feminine aspect, anima, and women carry an inner masculine aspect, animus. These contrasexual elements of our psyche often appear in our thoughts as figures of the opposite gender who fascinate or trouble us. Jung wrote, "The anima is not the soul in the dogmatic sense, not an anima rationalis, which is a philosophical conception, but a natural archetype that satisfactorily sums up all the statements of the unconscious, of the primitive mind, of the history of language and religion." When someone of the opposite gender occupies your thoughts persistently, they may be activating your anima or animus. Your unconscious mind may be using this person as a screen onto which it projects your inner, feminine, or masculine qualities that need integration. Sarah, a successful business executive, found herself thinking constantly about a soft-spoken, artistic man she'd met briefly at a gallery opening. Though they'd barely spoken, he appeared in her thoughts for weeks afterward. From a Jungian perspective, this man likely embodied qualities of Sarah's animus, creative, sensitive attributes she had suppressed while developing her career. Her mind's fixation wasn't about romantic interest, but about psychological integration. Jung might say that Sarah's preoccupation with this man was her psyche's way of balancing her dominant personality traits with complementary qualities that needed expression. Beyond the personal unconscious, Jung proposed the existence of a collective unconscious, a deeper layer of the psyche containing shared human experiences across cultures and time. This collective dimension contains what Jung called archetypes, universal patterns and images that appear in myths, dreams, and human behavior worldwide. Sometimes the people who dominate our thoughts connect us to these archetypal patterns. They seem to carry a significance beyond ordinary relationships. Jung would say they've activated an archetypal dimension in our psyche. Consider how certain people enter our lives and immediately feel familiar or significant beyond explanation. Jung might suggest they've activated archetypal content, perhaps embodying the wise elder, the divine child, the healer, or another archetypal pattern that resonates with our current psychological needs. Michael, a young man drifting through life without direction, couldn't stop thinking about his history professor after taking a single class with her. Her stories about ancient cultures and her passionate teaching style occupied his thoughts continually. From a Jungian perspective, this professor had likely activated the wise elder or mentor archetype in Michael's psyche, representing guidance he desperately needed during this phase of his life. Jung wrote, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. When someone stays in your thoughts, a transformation may be trying to occur within you. This brings us to Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to have no causal connection, yet feel significant. Jung believed these events reflect deeper patterns, connecting the physical world with psychological reality. Have you ever thought intensely about someone you haven't seen in years, only to receive a message from them shortly after? Jung would suggest this isn't mere coincidence, but potentially a synchronistic event reflecting the interconnected nature of consciousness. When someone repeatedly appears in your thoughts without obvious reason, it might signal a synchronistic connection, your psyche aligning with patterns beyond ordinary understanding. The persistent thoughts could be preparing you for a significant encounter or insight. Jung also explored the concept of complexes, emotionally charged groups of ideas that influence behavior. When someone triggers a complex, they often dominate our thoughts as our psyche processes the emotional activation. For instance, if you had a controlling parent, you might develop a control complex. Later in life, anyone who exhibits controlling behavior might trigger this complex, causing them to occupy your thoughts disproportionately as your psyche works through the emotional charge. Emma couldn't stop thinking about her new manager, despite having limited interactions with her. The manager's authoritative style had triggered Emma's unresolved father complex. The persistent thoughts weren't about the manager personally, but about Emma's opportunity to heal childhood patterns around authority. Jung noted, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fight." Emma's preoccupation with her manager offered a chance to bring unconscious material into consciousness. Another reason someone might dominate your thoughts comes from Jung's concept of the self, the archetype of wholeness, and the regulating center of the psyche. People who activate self-related contents often take on extraordinary significance in our thoughts. Jung described the self as not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. When someone embodies qualities that connect us to our authentic self, they often become fixtures in our mental landscape. They represent not just a person, but a pathway to our own wholeness and integration. Thomas, an accountant who had followed his parents' career advice rather than his own interests, found himself constantly thinking about a musician he'd seen perform. The musician's authentic self-expression and passion resonated with Thomas's buried artistic aspirations. His preoccupation signaled his psyche's yearning for authentic self-expression. Jung would say that Thomas's mind kept returning to the musician because this person represented a connection to his authentic self, the wholeness he needed to pursue. This brings us to Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of psychological integration through which one becomes their authentic self. People who catalyze this process often remain in our thoughts as significant psychological influences. Jung described individuation as becoming one's own self. We could therefore translate individuation as coming to selfhood or self-realization. When someone persistently occupies your thoughts, they may be playing a role in your individuation journey, helping you integrate disparate aspects of yourself into a more cohesive whole. Alex couldn't stop thinking about his college roommate who had pursued an unconventional life path, traveling the world and starting creative projects without concern for security. Years after they'd lost touch, this friend still appeared in Alex's thoughts. From a Jungian perspective, this friend represented aspects of freedom and authenticity that Alex needed to integrate into his own carefully planned life. The persistent thoughts were invitations to embrace more of his authentic self rather than remaining constrained by societal expectations. Beyond personal psychology, Jung explored the concept of spiritual connections. He wrote extensively about the soul and its yearnings, suggesting that some people occupy our thoughts because of soul-level connections. Jung stated, "The soul has been forgotten. We don't care if our fellow beings have a soul or not. Nobody would give a penny for self-knowledge nowadays. Yet these soul connections persist in our thoughts, reminding us of deeper dimensions of human experience. When someone stays in your thoughts despite separation by time or distance, it might reflect what Jung would call a soul connection, a relationship that transcends ordinary understanding and serves deeper purposes in your psychological and spiritual development." Jung also developed the concept of active imagination, a method of engaging with unconscious content through dialogue and creative expression. When someone dominates your thoughts, engaging with these preoccupations through active imagination might reveal their psychological significance. This could involve writing imaginary dialogues with the person, creating artwork about them, or simply reflecting deeply on what they represent to you. Through this process, the unconscious purpose of their presence in your thoughts often becomes clearer. Jung wrote, "Often the hands will solve a mystery that the intellect has struggled with in vain." Creative engagement with persistent thoughts about someone can unlock their meaning when rational analysis falls short. It's important to note that Jung distinguished between healthy psychological processes and pathological fixations. Persistent thoughts that cause significant distress or interfere with daily functioning may reflect psychological wounding rather than growth opportunities. Jung observed, "Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. Sometimes obsessive thoughts about another person serve as distractions from necessary inner work or emotional processing. If thoughts about someone cause extreme anxiety, depression, or dysfunctional behavior, they may reflect what Jung would call a neurotic pattern rather than a constructive psychological process. In such cases, professional support might be needed to address underlying issues. For those wrestling with persistent thoughts that feel overwhelming, Jung might recommend approaching them with curious attention rather than resistance. He famously said, "What you resist persists." Trying to force someone out of your mind often strengthens their presence there. Instead, Jung would suggest asking, "What might these thoughts be trying to tell me? What qualities does this person embody that resonate with my own psychological needs? How might this preoccupation be serving my growth? Jung believed that dreams provide valuable information about unconscious processes. If someone frequently appears in your dreams, as well as your waking thoughts, paying attention to the dream contexts can offer additional insights into their psychological significance. Jung wrote, "Dreams are the guiding words of the soul." When someone appears repeatedly in both thoughts and dreams, your psyche is emphasizing their importance to your inner work. As we integrate Jung's insights, we can see that when someone is always on your mind, it rarely means what we initially assume. These persistent thoughts typically point to inner processes of growth, integration, and self-discovery. Jung observed, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." The people who occupy our thoughts invite us to look within, to discover the parts of ourselves seeking expression, healing, or integration. So the next time you find yourself thinking repeatedly about someone, consider it an invitation from your unconscious mind. Rather than focusing exclusively on the external person, ask what they might represent within your own psyche. What qualities do they embody that you need to recognize in yourself? What aspects of your potential do they reflect back to you? In Jung's understanding, the mind keeps certain people in our thoughts not to torment us, but to guide us toward greater wholeness. By paying attention to these persistent presences in our mental landscape, we gain access to profound insights about ourselves and our psychological journey. As Jung wisely noted, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The people who occupy our minds most persistently often hold the keys to our deepest awakening. This Jungian perspective transforms our understanding of persistent thoughts about others, from random mental activity or mere attraction to meaningful psychological communication. It invites us to approach these preoccupations with curiosity rather than frustration, recognizing them as signposts on our journey toward psychological integration and authentic selfhood. So the next time someone is always on your mind, remember Jung's profound insight. They may be there not because of who they are, but because of who you are becoming.